Rubio overseas in Europe trying to help solve this Ukraine-Russia saga. And it sounds like we are making some progress. In fact, there are reports now that they're going to be restoring embassy staffing across the board. U.S. and Russia agreeing to start to normalize these relationships and wrap this thing up, hopefully for good. But here is a little bit of the scene on what it looks like there outside. High-level delegations from U.S. and Russia in Saudi Arabia today talking about ending the war in Ukraine. She is reporting here from St. Petersburg on what's happening.
We understand the Russian delegation has already had some initial contact with the American representatives. Kirill Dmitriev, who is the head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, is in Riyadh, and he has been talking to journalists saying that they have been already in some discussions on some of the issues. He said that Russia is not looking for the removal of sanctions in these negotiations. The general position of Russia for this meeting in Saudi Arabia is that Moscow is willing to listen to see what the U.S. is thinking about the restoration of ties with Russia. We understand that this meeting is expected to create some certain channels that will be providing for normalization of the relations between Moscow and Washington. We also understand that these negotiations will be paving the way for a potential summit between the Russian president and the American president in a third country, and then potentially for the reciprocal visits of these presidents to each other countries. We also hearing that the way to start the talks on Ukraine is expected to be discussed in Riyadh as well, because at this stage it is unclear what sort of modalities of these negotiations should be, as well as how to kickstart this process. So these are the...
All right, so good stuff. Their meeting, we had more happening there. So this was an interesting clip over in Europe. This was in Munich from the Munich Security Conference just, I believe, last week. While we're talking overseas, this guy was mocking Trump's peace plan for Ukraine. He's a Polish foreign minister, and these people are so arrogant and I think out of touch with the reality of how the world works that they don't even understand it. And they're all just sitting around in their little bubble, just yucking it up. Here is this exchange.
What would you say to Donald Trump, Minister Sikorsky? We have more chairs. We have more chairs.
I would tell him three things. Number one, Joe Biden was your successor and predecessor, but he planted the flag of the United States in downtown Kiev and declared on behalf of the United States that the US will be with Ukraine for as long as it takes until Ukraine secures its independence.
Okay, then we threw him out resoundingly. In fact, the Democrats threw him out resoundingly. And did he plant the American flag in Ukraine? I don't think so.
Therefore, the credibility of the United States depends on how this war ends.
That's why we're going to end it this way.
Just the Trump administration, the United States itself. I would secondly tell him that if you allow Putin to vassalize Ukraine, that will send a message to China that you can recover what you regard as a renegade province. And that would have direct consequences for US grand strategy, for the US system of alliances, and possibly for the future of Taiwan.
Yes, okay. So if we don't stop Russia from securing a portion of Ukraine, China's going to take over Taiwan, then probably take over Japan, those Japanese islands, and then Russia will march the French right into the sea.
And I'll thirdly tell him that we Europeans control the Nobel Peace Prize.
No one cares.
If you want to earn it, the peace has to be fair.
You can take your Nobel Peace Prize and shove it right up Zelensky's derriere. Okay, that's what we think about it. So enjoy your Peace Prize. No one cares. Here is what Emmanuel Macron said. After bringing together several European leaders, I have just spoken with Trump and then with Zelensky. This is Macron, who I think Candace Owen is saying he's married to, I don't know what. Something strange is happening there. I haven't watched it, but something strange is happening. We seek a strong and lasting peace in Ukraine. So to achieve this, Russia must end its aggression. And this must be accompanied by strong and credible security guarantees for the Ukrainians. Otherwise, there's a risk the ceasefire will end up like the Minsk agreements. Now, we will work on this together with all the Europeans, Americans, and Ukrainians. This is the key. We are convinced that Europeans must invest better, more, and together in their security and defense, both today and for the future. To this end, Europeans want to accelerate this implementation of their own agenda for sovereignty, security, and competitiveness. What's competitive? You can't even insult each other over there in Germany. That's retarded. Excuse me, bad language. Shouldn't have said that word. Work will continue based upon the European Commission's proposals, both in supporting Ukraine and in developing and investing in our defense. This agenda, defined in 2022 at the Versailles Summit, must simply be carried out. Decisions, actions, coherence, and all done very quickly. I will continue these discussions in the upcoming days from what's-his-face, Emmanuel Macron, married to his spouse. So here's Rubio. He was over there for 3.5 years while this conflict has raged. No one else has been able to bring something like this together. Here's Rubio meeting with these folks saying, we're going to solve this.
For 3.5 years while this conflict has raged, or 3 years while it's raged, no one else has been able to bring something together like what we saw today, because Donald Trump is the only leader in the world that can. So no one is being sidelined here. But President Trump is in a position that he campaigned on to initiate a process that could bring about an end to this conflict. And from that could emerge some very positive things for the United States, for Europe, for Ukraine, for the world. But first, it begins by the end of this conflict. And so the only thing President Trump's trying to do is bring about peace. It's what he campaigned on. It's something the world should be thanking President Trump for doing. He's been able to achieve what for 2.5, 3 years, no one else has been able to achieve, which is to begin this process, a serious process. Obviously, a lot of work remains before we have a result. But President Trump's the only one that can do it.
And we're making some progress. At least they're talking to each other, for crying out loud. And as we saw, this story is saying they're going to have some high-level talks. They're talking about restoring embassy staffing and marking the reversal of American policy in Moscow. Rubio said both countries had agreed to, quote, reestablish the functionality of our respective missions in Washington and Moscow. Said negotiators also agreed to begin to discuss and think about and examine both the geopolitical and economic cooperation that could result from an end to the conflict in Ukraine. It would be nice to have that solved. Lavrov told reporters the meeting was very useful for the Russians foreign minister. You remember that guy. And he confirmed efforts to remove obstacles under the Trump administration. He had reason to believe that the American side has begun to better understand our position, because we're actually communicating on this, so that we can bring this to a conclusion. Trump announced last week that he and Putin talked for 90 minutes, and they're making some progress, so we're happy to see it.